Hello, how's it going? I'm Leia, and welcome back to my channel where we talk about tech, career, startups, and life. I am an iOS engineer turned product manager, and today we're going to talk about some key differences between the role of a software engineer and a product manager. For context, I have a CS degree from Grinnell College. It's a liberal arts college in the US, and I've been working at different stages of startups for about 5 years now. And I flip-flop between the role of an iOS engineer and product manager quite a bunch. As a senior in college, it was really hard to find resources on what the two careers are actually like in the real world, especially the nuances that no one talks about. So I'm here to help you fill that knowledge gap if you're debating between the two. I will cover 7 key areas that I think differ between both the roles so that you can make a more informed decision for which one is the better fit for you. So the areas we'll talk about today are your area of influence, the nature of work, people interactions, domain knowledge, evaluation, time horizons, and flexibility. So let's dive right in. Starting off with the area of influence. So a software engineer is really concerned with how things get built and is the ultimate decision maker in terms of software architecture, the tech stack, and any implementation details. In terms of the organization, outside of their role in developing the product, a software engineer also contributes to technology excellence for the whole engineering organization. On the other hand, the product manager is concerned with what we build and why we're building it. They'll own the team's future initiatives and roadmap, and in the grand scheme of things, they contribute to the company's overall strategy and help bring the initiatives of other teams to life as well if they need product support. So moving on to the actual nature of work itself. As a software engineer, your work has a pretty narrow scope. You'll have a lot of clarity for most of the things that you'll work on, and ultimately, you are the one who is responsible for the product. The nature of your work is almost purely in execution. Your responsibility is to write, debug, and ship quality code, design solutions for technical problems, improve engineering velocity, and keep a stable, scalable, and performant product. The biggest chunk of your work is focused on managing the code. That means writing code, writing tests, and deploying software. You'll do a lot of pair programming, you'll create pull requests, do code reviews for your teammates, and write documentation to maintain a healthy code base. And once you progress in your career, you'll also be in charge of designing broader software architecture and mentor junior engineers. As a product manager, your scope is very, very broad, and you have little clarity on what you should be doing. In fact, it's your job to provide that clarity for others. You are ultimately accountable for the product. So if something goes wrong, it's kind of on you. You have these 2 modus operandi. The first is strategy, where you try to identify opportunities between business and customer needs and prioritize initiatives and tactics to address them. You need to have a really good sense of the competitive landscape and constantly analyze your market. You also spend a lot of time seeking knowledge, feedback, and buy-in from relevant stakeholders to ultimately sell your vision of the product's future. The second part focuses on execution. As a product manager, you create and set a roadmap. You write product specs and requirement docs. You might build some mock-ups and provide lots of design feedback. You will write and prioritize user stories and work with engineering to get them built while navigating trade-offs. You will also manage the launch processes and use data to measure the success and impact of your features, and then iterate and respond to user feedback. Most importantly, you'll have to motivate your team and make sure to remove any blockers that they're facing to keep the momentum going. So instead of managing code, you manage relationships with your teams, your users, and your internal and external stakeholders. A big part of any job, really, is interacting with other people. As a software engineer, you interact with a smaller number of people than a product manager. So if you're an introvert, software engineering might be the way to go. In a typical week, a software engineer will spend most of their time with other software engineers. And next up are designers, QA analysts, and product managers. And last up, data analysts or data scientists. That's not to say that a software engineer can't or won't ever interact with anyone else, but the chances of that happening regularly are pretty slim. Now, as a PM in any given week, you'll definitely interact with all the same roles as a software engineer. So software engineers, designers, and other product managers, QA analysts, and data analysts. But you will also interact with marketing and content or copywriters, sales, finance, compliance, user research, customer service, and more, depending on what industry you work in. You will also spend a lot of time interacting with external stakeholders, which will most likely be account managers for third-party software. But most importantly, you will spend a lot of time interacting with your users. As a product manager, one of your core responsibilities is growing and maintaining relationships with everyone related to the company, whether it's inside or outside. So if you're an introvert, beware, because it can get pretty exhausting. As far as your domain knowledge goes, a software engineer can be described as a specialist. You will know all the ins and outs of the engineering stack and any alternative options you might have. You will develop expertise in programming languages, in technical concepts, and you'll make sure that you adopt the best practices and processes for your team. The great thing about being a software engineer is that your domain knowledge is kind of industry agnostic. So if you're currently working in edtech, you can easily pick up your bags and move to a different industry, like healthcare, because the skills you have to know are broadly the same. Your day-to-day won't change that much, only the context of your work. As a product manager, on the other hand, you are a very broad generalist, and you need to be kind of a Jack or Jill of all trades. Your domain knowledge is equally split between hard and soft skills. So first, you need to understand some basic programming and large-scale software systems. Programming is not really necessary, but it is super useful, so I highly recommend taking at least a few courses. Next is lo-fi design and prototyping that goes along with user research and interviewing, and data analysis and manipulation. You will certainly work with specialists who are much better than you in all of these fields, but you do need to know enough to discuss and make decisions in each of these areas competently. The other 50% are your soft skills, like collaboration, communication, presentation, conflict management, and relationship building. One thing that's not great about being a PM is that the longer you work in a certain role or industry, the more of an industry expert you become, which makes it difficult to make a move to a different industry in the future. So for example, if I spend 5 years working in fintech, but I really want to work in edtech, my 5 years in fintech won't really serve me well, unless I somehow find a magical company that combines both. The fifth key difference is related to evaluation. As a software engineer, you have a very clear-cut and binary definition of success. Either your code works or it doesn't. Either you solve the bug or you don't. You will always know if your code has 100% test coverage or less. And it's really easy to tell how much of your code base you've converted to Swift versus Objective-C, for example. Your sense of accomplishment is very frequent, and you'll constantly receive affirmation that you're doing a good job, or not. So as a software engineer, you're an individual contributor. And what that means is that your success is also evaluated as an individual. You get constant feedback from both your product via any sort of analytics frameworks in terms of adoption rate and stability, and you also get feedback from your colleagues through code reviews. And that feedback that you get is generally very tangible and actionable. So, for example, when you read through your code reviews, you'll know exactly what to fix, and your debugger is going to tell you exactly where there's a bug in the code. So it's a very black and white definition of success. As a PM, though, you don't have very clear success metrics. Sure, you can measure how your features and experiments are performing, but that's only a small fraction of your job as a whole. and everything else like relationships and alignment and whether you've made the right or at least a good enough choice are difficult to measure. Your sense of accomplishment is infrequent and delayed, and it's based around product launches and company quarters. And your success is not really measured as an individual, but rather the success of your team and your product. Is your team motivated? Are they working together well? Have you made things clear for them? What's their velocity? Have you unblocked them? As a PM, you don't really get regular feedback. The feedback you get is pretty irregular based on your actual day-to-day. You do get a lot of feedback and opinion on the product itself from pretty much everyone involved, but very little is tangible feedback on your work. So the feedback you do get is more in line of, why didn't you make this feature more prominent, or why haven't you looked into this issue yet? And when will my requests get prioritized? So often there are many ways to act on this feedback, and you have to apply a bit of your gut feeling and some data analysis to decide on your best course of action, but you're never 100% sure if anything you do is actually correct. So your life is never black and white, but rather this spectrum of 50 shades of gray. Another key difference between the two roles are your time horizons. So as a software engineer, you normally work in 2 to 3 week sprints, sprinkled with a very structured timeline of agile processes and ceremonies like groomings, plannings, retrospectives, and postmortems. When a sprint begins, you kind of have a set amount of work to get done, and once all gets done, you've finished a chunk of your work. And that makes it very easy to plan how to structure your work and when to do it. Now, as a PM, you are always oscillating between what's happening now, what is happening next, and what's going to happen in the future. So you tag along in all of these agile processes, and you're probably coordinating most of the sessions, but otherwise your timeline is very unstructured. New work keeps coming your way, and you can hardly plan a few days in advance, let alone a few weeks. Finally, the last key difference is flexibility. As a software engineer, your job is to get a set amount of work done in an allotted time frame. But when you do the work and where you do it from doesn't really matter. Since most of your work will be asynchronous from the rest of the team, you can be pretty flexible to decide when doing focused, deep work suits you and when you want to do some more admin-related tasks. Of course, you'll still be collaborating with coworkers and have to come to some regularly scheduled meetings, but generally you have a lot more freedom with your time. So it's easy to work on a different schedule than your coworkers, or even in a different time zone within reason, of course. And while a product manager's role might sound more flexible, the overall environment in which you work is less so. Because you work across so many disciplines and collaborate with basically the entire company, you need to make sure that your work syncs up with other people. I'm over-exaggerating a bit here, but it can definitely feel sometimes that you're a slave to your calendar and Slack. So sometimes you have to be very strict with setting boundaries to carve out some time for deep focused work. And while COVID has made it possible for a lot of us to work from home, generally a product manager has to be present at the office most of the time. And the main reason for that is having face time with your coworkers, which kind of goes hand in hand with building and maintaining relationships. Because much of what you can accomplish will depend on how much social capital you've built. So there you have it. The key differences between being a software engineer and a product manager, at least from my experience. So hopefully now you know a little bit more about what each role entails and have better clarity in figuring out which one is right for you. I would love to hear about your experience with these roles, so please comment down below because I'm sure I missed some things and some of the differences that I described might not apply to everyone. So I'll see you next time. Bye.